Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So we're different colors and we're different breeds, and different people have different needs. It's obvious you hate me, though I've done nothing wrong.
It is a tragedy that was predicted by many people, myself included. If it turns out that this poor man, this 40-year-old man in Harlow, was murdered as a result of being Polish, then I'm afraid no one will be surprised, will they? That's the first question. No one will be surprised. Anyone who listens to this programme on a regular basis would have heard the weird emboldening, the validation that people who are just stone-cold racists have taken from the Brexit vote. Wrongly, of course. I say a billion times that not everybody who voted to leave the European Union is a racist, but somehow many of the prominent protagonists, most obviously, of course, Nigel Farage and his outrageous posters and disgusting comments about people speaking foreign languages on trains, have delivered a message to, and again, if you look at the breakdown, to uneducated, angry, dispossessed people, that their problems are somehow the fault of Polish plasterers and Romanian minicab drivers. Best bit of business that's ever been done on behalf of the establishment, really, to move the blame away from those who have everything and put it in the court of those who have nothing. So a group of teenagers in Harlow, not a town I know well. There may be something about Harlow, as with Molenbeek in Belgium, that can explain how young people can be turned to hatred just so effectively. But if it turns out, as police are investigating, that a man has been beaten to death after a gang heard him speaking a foreign language, I want you to tell me who you think is responsible for radicalising these young British schoolchildren on 0345 6060 973. I think the time has probably come to stop treading on eggshells, hasn't it? To stop pretending that we are looking at something in Britain that can be loosely described as justifiable anger, or a rejection of political correctness, or what else does it get described? Plain speaking your mind, not allowed to say what you think anymore. If it turns out that teenage boys have beaten a man to death because he was speaking Polish in a public place, then there is blood on hands. There's blood on hands that will be in this studio not too far from now. There is blood on hands that are regularly appearing on television programmes. There's blood on hands of anybody who has suggested that speaking Polish in a public place is in any way undesirable, unacceptable, or wrong. Because dumb, angry, hormonal, uneducated children take these messages from adults who appear to be speaking with authority, who are appearing on the telly and the radio, so they can't be like, complete scumbags. As with Anjem Choudhury and his followers, the fact that he appeared on television and radio all the time lent him a validation, lent him a status that should have been utterly denied by all right-thinking people. But we've done the same with white racists. We've allowed white racists to assume positions of popularity, positions of prominence in this country, and if teenagers respond to that by believing that they've somehow been given a carte blanche, been given an invitation to behave in this fashion, even if it's just spitting and shouting, it doesn't have to be violence and death, even if it's just spitting and shouting, then who do you hold responsible? That's my question for you this morning. It's a rhetorical question in a way, but I'm very keen to speak to people who don't think that the responsibility lies with politicians and pundits who've been whipping up race hate now for the best part of a decade. The United Nations, although they probably get filed under experts, don't they, and people who shouldn't be trusted because they base their observations on evidence, facts, statistics. The United Nations have fingered Brexit campaigners, have named, actually they didn't name any politicians, they just said politicians, and given them responsibility for the outbreak of race hate that we've seen. 3,000 incidents reported in the relevant period. United Nations are in no doubt at all as to who is responsible for the change in tone, whether or not they would leap from the tone to the actual behaviour. Well, that's for you to say. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. It's fascinating, isn't it, how the pendulum swings. A text from James: nobody condones thuggery and murder, James. The people responsible for beating up and killing are the criminals that did it. Which is, you can say, I suppose, possessed of a patina of logic, until you wonder whether the same applies to criminals of a different hue or a different faith or a different colour. I don't imagine, mate, that you would be making that point if we were to suggest that the only people responsible for murders committed by Islamists are the people who commit the murders. We know now that there's a significant swathe of the people in this country who think you should have the right to tell women on French beaches what to wear because they happen to belong to the same faith as a murderer. So it's not true to say that we only hold the people responsible for murder. Responsible for murder. We are constantly holding other people. What's a hate preacher? What's a radicalizer? What's a process? What's brainwashing? What's grooming? How do you convince a 15-year-old girl to travel to Syria unless you've got an evil adult at the heart of that process, unless there is an evil adult seeking to sow these seeds of hatred and disgust in the hearts of impressionable young people? And this is, to me, at first glance, exactly the same. I feel sorry for these kids. Even if they turn out to be race-hate murderers, I feel desperately, desperately sorry for them. Because the difference between people that swallow poison and people that pour poison is profound. These teenagers, as we will discover more facts, it hasn't stopped the Sun from going for killed by teen mob for being Polish. That's the headline we're working from this morning, the headline on the nation's best-selling newspaper, which has, of course, also indulged in some fairly casual race hatred itself over recent years. But the question becomes really quite straightforward. These poor kids have been turned into murderers by what? 0345 6060 973. What is it about Britain in August, just as we get to the end of August 2016, that could have created teenagers who think that it's acceptable to attack, beat up, ultimately kill a man for being foreign? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And I think we can be honest with each other here, can't we? At 10 after 10. There's only one answer to this question. But there is no other answer. So it's the media, it's the prominent personalities whose names trip off your tongue. It's people like Nigel Farage who have marched up and down the country effectively saying, no, it's all right to hate people according to their origins. It's all right to hate people according to their birth. It's all right to put up posters that echo completely the vitriol of Nazism and pretend that you don't know what you're doing. It's absolutely fine to tell people that not liking those speaking foreign in public is a perfectly reasonable position to adopt. Hey, even if you're married to a foreigner, you can make these points. It's brilliant. That's what we've got now. I don't know how you get this genie back in the bottle. I really don't. Breaks my heart. And I say it again. I mean, what you'll get now is people queuing up to blame the parents of these kids, I imagine. It's more complicated than that. As with any process of radicalisation or grooming, there is almost always a string that is being pulled from far away. And I just want to know who you think is pulling that string. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You can email james@lbc.co.uk. You can text me on 84850. And you can, of course, tweet me. The number you need there is at Mr. James OB. But the question is really straightforward. Same question we've asked far too often recently when we're talking about radicalised young people doing things that the rest of us can't understand. Some of us, and I give myself a pat on the back for this, some of us manage to see the problem irrespective of colour or creed. Young people doing insanely evil things, probably not entirely of their own blame. Young people doing insanely evil things because grown-ups somewhere benefit from it, whether they get power, whether they get money, whether they get political clout, whether they get shifts doing my holiday cover, whatever it is, adults saying insanely hateful things and pretending that they don't know how those messages fester in the minds of impressionable young people. That's the point. And that's my second question. Do you really think they don't know? Well, what is it? Well, you make the list of your favourites, your favourite hate preachers, and then just tell me whether you think they know that this is the sort of behaviour that they are actively encouraging, or do they genuinely not see it? Do they lack the empathy, the wit, the wisdom to actually see that standing up in public and decrying foreigners will, in the minds of impressionable, uneducated Essex teenagers or undereducated Essex teenagers, seem like a validation, like an invitation to be obnoxious? Actually, I wonder if that's an even more interesting question. Because it is rhetorical, isn't it, to say, who are the hate preachers that these people are responding to? We all know the answer to that question. Do you think the hate preachers know? Farage said something, didn't he, about there being violence on the streets, and then pretended that he hadn't said what he meant, or, oh, no, I'm going to be very controversial. People aren't going to like me for saying this. That sounded to me like an invitation. That sounded to me like an exhortation. And remember, this lot won. This lot won the referendum. You would have hoped, wouldn't you, that the kind of hate and vitriol that they employed in the course of the campaign would now disappear. But it isn't. It hasn't. It's not gone anywhere. Creepy Uncle Nigel was on stage with Donald Trump, of all people, just last week. Probably the most absolutely upfront racist that Western democracy has seen in 50 years. So it's going to get worse. We know who's responsible for it. We know what they're doing. Everybody with a brain and a functioning heart and conscience can see exactly what's being done to our country, being turned in on each other on a scale that's never been seen since the 1950s. Ironically enough, a period to which a lot of these people are keen to return. But do they know what they're doing? That's what I want you to tell me. Whether you love them or, like me, loathe them, I want you to tell me, okay? Do they know what they're doing? Does a politician like Farage, talking about people speaking foreign on a train, know that this leads inexorably to young people thinking that they have the right to object to people speaking foreign in public? Do they know what they're doing? I'm such a naive little fella. I'm such a liberal. I'm such a rose-tinted optimist, desperate to see the good in almost everybody, that I can give you credibility. I can certainly give you a couple of minutes on the radio if you honestly think they don't realise what they're doing. People who've sat in front of this microphone spouting the sort of hatred that would have been echoed right up and down the country, do they honestly not realise what they're doing? Yes or no? I'm going to hate me for this. I really want to believe that they don't. I don't want to believe that we've actually got real fascists now on the march in our country. I want to believe that the people who put together the front page of The Sun talking about why the number of Polish shops on high streets explains why we voted to leave the referendum. I honestly want to believe that my friends and colleagues who still work on red top newspapers just don't believe or see or know that this can lead to the kind of behaviour that we've been detailing on an unprecedented scale in recent weeks. You remember the lady in Chester who'd had dog excrement thrown at her door, the widow of a GP being told to go back to Germany by by her still neighbours. And you know, and I know, because, I don't know, why do we see it so clearly? The link must be there. Do they not know? Do the hate preachers not know what they're doing? Chowdhury and his mates knew exactly what they were doing. Chowdhury and his mates were proud of what they were doing. Chowdhury and his disgusting cronies revelled and relished in the reactions that they prompted among their followers. Do the white hate preachers of Great Britain in 2016 realise what their followers are being turned into, or are they too busy counting their money and their newspaper columns and their appearances on media and their, reality television invitations? Are they just too busy feathering their own nest to realise the evil that they've sown amongst the rest of us? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Actually, I'm not going to the travel just yet. I want to say something else to you today. I didn't want to do this topic. I didn't want to do it. I've had enough now. To sit here and say, I told you so. What does that achieve? Who does that help? I didn't want to do this topic. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to open up my phone lines on this subject, because we just know. There are two types of people in the country at the moment. People who know that the politicians and pundits are creating an atmosphere in which a race hate murder had become inevitable, and it's not, it turns out to be that, of course, necessarily the first. Everybody knows. There's just people that admit it and people that pretend they don't. That's all, isn't it? Have I just killed the phone in the first 17 minutes? There's only two answers to this question. Are the politicians and the pundits, who we can all name and who've all got their images in our mind at the moment, are they responsible for these murders? There's only two types of people who can respond to that. Honest people and dishonest people. Because everybody knows they are. Everybody knows they are. How can they not be? So let's have a look instead at whether or not you believe they know that they bear responsibility for the evil that has been unleashed in our communities. 0345 6060 973. 10:17 is the time. If it turns out we have another race hate murder on our hands, that is what police are investigating in Harlow in Essex, then I want you to tell me, hand on heart, whether you believe the people who routinely spout bile about foreigners daring to speak foreign on trains and similar incidences actually realise that they are potentially encouraging such behaviour, or whether they're, I don't know, so far up their own fundament and so busy feathering their own nest that they truly don't believe they bear any responsibility, which would be a bit like arguing that Anjem Choudhury didn't bear any responsibility for his followers doing disgusting things. Zach's in Halifax. Zach, what's going on?
I love what you're saying. It's absolutely brilliant.
I wish I didn't have to.
The people, it's the people, what you said, it's actually struck, who pour the hate. And
it's a business model. Look, it's a business model. The Sun will stick on its front page whatever will get the biggest emotional reaction, and if that is something about, there's a great juxtaposition that someone's put on Twitter, which is them taking a pot shot at Poles one week and then today putting killed by a teen mob for being Polish. So there's a business model there, and that's why I'm clinging to the notion that some of my former colleagues in the newspaper world don't really fully appreciate what they're doing.
It's horrible. You know what it is? Like idiots like Anjem Choudhury, they turn these people into monsters. They make them who they are, and I'm glad I celebrated when he got convicted.
Of course, everybody did.
It's not just Anjem Choudhury. You've got your other colleague Katie Hopkins, and when she spews her bile.
Do you think she knows? Do you think she realises what she's...
She has to say what she says so she can exist. She can get coverage. So she can cause, a commotion and say, hey, look at me. Hey, look at all these Muslims. And think, I've got nothing to do with Rochdale. Painting the whole picture of Muslim men. You think, oh my God. And it's everything has something to do with her. It's Muslim this, Muslim that.
I'm never entirely comfortable with people criticising colleagues, although I sense that we're moving towards a place where I'm going to have to jettison that discomfort. I want to focus on anti-Polish rhetoric at the moment.
Do you know what? I have a Polish girl who works for me in an office, and you know what? Love her to pieces. She's hardworking, and you know what? She's brilliant. I have English people working. But the point is, as born here, but a child of immigrants, my parents,
like Nigel Farage's children, also, of course, children of an immigrant.
Yeah, but my parents came with, my dad came on a scholarship from the old British Shell Company, and of my wife's family, her parents came because they needed the work. This country needed the workforce,
and of course it still does. But again, I'm going to just steer you back to this central question, and you can put whatever name you want on this particular in this particular pulpit. When people like you clearly see the link between rhetoric and violence, and people like Anjem Choudhury are quite upfront about the fact that they want violence to result from their rhetoric, do you think that the hate preachers in the British media actually genuinely, or I can just about imagine, mate, if I was on my uppers and I had to make a crust and I've only got what I've got and I had to sort of find a way of making an impact in the British media, I reckon I could do a pretty good job of being a hate preacher. I've got the right accent. I went to the right... It's great. I can pretend to be anti-establishment when really my face is squashed so hard against that window that I look like a jelly baby. I'm so desperate to be inside the establishment. I could do it. And while I was doing it, Zach, I could say to myself as I lay in bed every night, nah, it's just showbiz. It's just a game show. It's just a pantomime. It's just fun. I reckon I could just about pull that off. Am I sounding silly?
Do you know what? There's some people who know what they're doing. These people, they're intelligent people. They know what they're doing, regardless of whether it earns them a living. They know what they're doing. They know what they say causes the discomfort. Can you
remember Can you think of a public figure apart from Farage who has spoken about discomfort at hearing people speaking foreign in a public place?
Your colleague. There's another columnist. Sometimes I don't know why some people I read here and there, the Mail, and you get some of their columnists. And Farage, you know what? I wish he didn't practice. He's like the Enoch Powell of.
And that's a brilliant point. And that is a brilliant point, because the people who are described as knowing full well that the rhetoric leads to the violence but pretending that it doesn't, they will see that, what you've just said, as a compliment. 10:25. is the time. Sorry, Zach. Go on.
I'm just afraid sometimes, because I fear for my safety, my children's safety. I fear because I haven't done anything wrong.
Can I tell you something odd? And I don't have, well, I suppose there's some anti-Irish feeling that's emerging now, but I don't have an obvious ethnicity, so I don't worry for my children's future on the front that you describe. But this is going to sound really strange. I haven't told anybody this before. A lot of my fears for the future are actually linked to old people. They're not linked to minorities. They're linked to the ultimate accident of birth. The ultimate accident of birth is not geographical or cultural or religious. The ultimate accident of birth is actually chronological. It's the year in which you were born. And if we are now, as I believe, creating a country in which othering is normal, you get treated differently according to the law, according to an accident of birth, I think we're opening the door to a decade or two down the line, when things get really, really serious, taking away the protection that old people deserve, that old people currently enjoy, on the grounds that, they're not pulling their weight, they're not contributing, that's what odd though it sounds, that's the thing I worry about most, is that if we allow people to be othered because of their colour, if we allow people to be rendered inferior or second-class citizens because of their religion, if we allow people to enjoy less protection under the law based on where they were born, then eventually, I think we bring closer a world in which you will enjoy less protection under the law because of when you were born. I passionately worry about this. If you allow your country to be turned into a place where you get treated differently according to where you were born, you bring a hell of a lot closer the likelihood of waking up one day in a country where you get treated differently according to when you were born. And the economic drain that elderly people, as we all get older, are going to put upon the rest of the population will create, like a financial crisis or an immigration crisis, will create those perfect circumstances for people to say, well, hang on a minute, if you get treated differently in Britain according to where you were born, why shouldn't we start introducing slightly discriminatory policies according to when you were born? Zach, thank you. I'm going to try to speak to as many people as I can this hour. Of course, the question is fairly straightforward. I think everybody accepts that the rhetoric leads to behaviour. Otherwise, the rhetoric wouldn't be so toxic. So whether you're putting your fingers in your ears and pretending that you don't see the link between the politicians you voted for and the pundits you routinely applaud and race-hate violence, whether the situation in Harlow that's in the news today or any of the other 3,000 incidences that have recently been recorded, we all know the truth. We all know there's a link. I'm not pretending anymore that there's even a debate about this. Of course there's a link. Some people love it and some people hate it. If you're one of the people that loves it, do you think they know what they're doing? Do you think your heroes and heroines actually know what they're doing? Or do you think that they can somehow persuade themselves that they're not creating a toxic world in which their own children are going to grow up, that they're not contributing to a ongoing momentum gathering sense that soon we're just going to be turning on each other on a scale that we haven't seen in decades? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 29 minutes after 10. Coming up later in the programme, I'm going to turn your attention to this 13 billion euro demand that the EU has effectively delivered to Apple on behalf of the Irish government. But, of course, the Irish government doesn't necessarily want it. If you needed a more perfect illustration of how confusing and indeed confused the political situation has become, you could do a lot worse than this. And I want to know what it says to you about big business, about tax, and indeed about political union, because at first glance you'd think it was proof that the EU's got teeth we didn't know it had as we approached that referendum. At second glance you could do it or construe it in exactly the opposite way and say that this shows why we're better off out. Don't want the EU coming over here telling massive tax avoiding businesses that they have to start paying their way. Thank you very much. We'd like to leave them filling their trousers with their noses in the troughs. We concern ourselves with the grimmest of news, but sadly the most predictable. Killed by teen mob for being Polish is the headline. The investigation is underway. No charges have been brought yet, which is why we can talk about this and not talk about, of course, the death of a Labour MP not so long ago, which a few of you are reminding me of. But the legal situation is very clear. The difference between charges and arrests covers almost entirely what we can and can't discuss on the programme. But I'm asking you a very tricky question, a very difficult question actually, both on a personal and a professional level, which is this. The people like Nigel Farage who routinely complain with their sort of sly little smile about, people talking foreign on a train. Do they know how that message festers in the minds of, a lot of you are telling me that this particular part of Essex is particularly poverty-stricken and particularly ignorant, and that this particular shopping centre has particular problems with antisocial behaviour. So when you take people like that, remember the kid before the general election when they went into a primary school and they said, how are you all going to vote? And the sort of 8-year-old boy said, I'm going to vote UKIP so we can send all the foreigners home. And they must know, mustn't they? I had a conversation with Suzanne Evans about this. Very nice lady, actually. We did a job together at the dreadful BBC. And I asked her, look, I know you're supposed to be the rational face of the party, but when I had to mute you on Twitter because of your followers piling in on me, you must see all that. How can you not realise what you're encouraging? And she said, well, I mute them too. I kind of didn't pursue the point. I had no reason not to believe her. I mute them or I block them too. And you sort of think, well, hang on, how can they still be replying to you if you've muted? So do they know, these people? Not so much her, because I don't think I've heard her actually peddle the stone cold racism of complaining about the nationality of your neighbours or the audacity of a fellow human being to choose what language they would like to speak to another fellow human being in without asking you for permission. The stone cold racism of a Farage. Do they not know? Stand on a stage with Trump. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, Trump is, by everybody's standards, the worst sort of human being. I don't know whether he means it or not. I know for a fact he's doing it because it's good for Trump. Does he not see? Do they not know what they're doing? Is it completely pathetic of me to cling to the notion that this is not a country yet in which stone-cold fascists have been allowed to creep up the rest of us in carpet slippers because we thought they'd be wearing jackboots? Janet's in Harlow. Janet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Yes, I need to declare an interest in that. I live in Harlow, and my husband's second generation Polish. His father came over after the war.
Okay.
I'd like, I want to say, yeah, they know exactly what they're doing, the politicians. It's entirely cynical. They're using the old device of divide and rule. And you need to link it really to the whole programme of austerity that they've inflicted on people. It's, blame others for the hardship that you're suffering. So if you live in a town like Harlow, as I do, and visit that little local shopping centre every day for my shopping.
What's it like, Janet? I've never been there.
It's okay, actually. Yeah. It's okay. I mean, I think there have been some problems of sort of drug dealing and that in the evenings, and there has been violence there in the past. But in general, I mean, I feel it's a safe place to visit, as most places in Harlow are. But it's a town that's been, left behind. Shops have closed. We've got no Marks and Spencers anymore. Robert Dias has gone. Of course, BHS.
Robert Dias has gone.
Elsewhere.
Robert Dias has gone. Oh my Lord, that is the end of civilization as we know it.
Yeah, things like the old public services we had, like the ski slope, the sports centre, the swimming pool, have closed and been replaced by some public-private sports centre that young people. Most of the young people in Harlow probably can't afford to go to. So like you, I actually do feel sorry for those kids as well. I'm a retired teacher, so, I know the kids of Harlow as well.
You're allowed to feel sorry for these kids, I think, by the kind of people that we're talking about. You're not allowed to feel sorry when a 15-year-old girl is groomed to such a degree that she flies out to Syria and dies. I
feel sorry for her as well.
Yeah, I do too. I do too now.
I mean, I don't condone the act. But
you can remember what it's like to be 15, and you take your messages. You take your messages from adults.
When there's a crowd of them, and as you say, these views have been spouted by politicians, and as I say, I think entirely cynically. They know exactly what they're doing. It's blame the disabled, blame the so-called benefit scroungers. Blame the elderly, of whom I'm, one of the
I think that's next. I think misogyny will get a big boost, and then I worry for the old.
I'm a Guardian reader, so even the so-called left of centre press is sort of blaming the elderly. Yeah, the baby boomers. It's that generation, and that we should be giving up our bus passes and everything else. For the youngsters. Yeah. No, I don't. Of course.
How do we get the genie back in the bottle, Janet?
by getting rid of this government for a start.
Replacing them with what?
Showing what the majority of people in Harlow, and the majority of people, I think, probably, if the Sun can carry that headline, then I think they know that most of their readers are actually going to think it's dreadful. But again, it's about it's a cynical move on their part, because, as you say, they're not afraid to use racist language, but it's, you know, they're weighing up.
Poll chances.
Who do we hate the most? You know, a gang of yobs. Or a couple of Polish guys, you know.
A gang of yobs whose ethnicity is not yet established, of course. It's worth making that point, because my position won't change regardless of what their ethnicity turns out to be. It's the behaviour, as Janet reminds us, that you should be condemning, not the accidents of birth. It was poll chances, that headline that has been juxtaposed with today's headline. Exclusive EU welfare farce, migrants' guide to raking in UK benefits. And when they publish stories like this, which routinely turn out not to be true or to have been horribly exaggerated, I guess because I have a background in newspapers, I don't want to believe... I just don't want to believe that they know what they're doing. They're just looking at the bucks, they're just looking at the checks, they're just looking at the circulation. They're not actually thinking beyond tomorrow's fish and chip newspaper. But the politicians, it's rather harder to give them the benefit of the doubt. Janet, thank you. We're staying in Harlow for the next caller. Jerry is there. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Oh, hiya. Yeah, basically, let's send my heartfelt thoughts to, you know, his brother, his family, and obviously the whole of the Polish community. I was absolutely disgusted.
Actually, I'd go further, Jerry. I'd extend my sympathies and condolences to the whole of the Harlow community. Everybody there has suffered as a result of this crime.
Of course, but you try to get your head around how some, especially the youngsters, can have so much hatred.
Yes.
For two guys coming out of a takeaway, having a bite to eat before they go home. You know, what's their mindset? It's beyond me. Honestly, I've read it 3 times this morning in the paper, in the Mirror, and it just brings tears to my eyes. The fear of God those poor guys must have had, 20 baying mob.
Where does the hate come from?
I think a lot of it comes, dare I say it, parents. You know, you hear it in taxi ranks, on the bus, wherever you are. Oh yeah, the bloody Poles, or you Romanians, or they've even said it about the blacks or the Chinese, or whatever race or creed, coming over here getting our jobs. But for God's sakes, you know, we need these guys, you know, whatever colour they are, religion, you know, anything. I mean, we'd have no NHS tomorrow if it wasn't for, you know, some of these people coming over. And I've been into a few of the Polish shops in Harlow. There's not that many, but there's a few. And, you know, they're the nicest bunch that you could ever come across.
It's funny that, isn't it? Because, Jan, before you mentioned how many shops are shutting, and then you're reminding us that actually the Polish residents of your town are opening shops.
There's only a couple of, like, little delis.
I know, but it's the definition of recovery. It's shops shutting on a high street. Who's opening new ones?
Yeah. Oh, we've lost all the main all it is now is gyms and jewellers in Harlow.
So you must have tattoo parlours.
Probably.
In my old town of Kidderminster, tattoo parlours, fast food joints and charity shops seem to be on the rise, and they're spending millions of pounds building out-of-town shopping centres. Jerry, as long as there are people like you on the streets, don't worry. The good will eventually prevail. I just worry now how bad it's going to have to get before good fights back. You take Terry, you take care. 10:43 is the time. This is a nice little poem from Michael Rosen, I think it is. Although Nick, yes, it is. It's that comment, and you're right, Nick, to send me this, because I think that Jack Boots carpet slippers analogy did come from this originally. He wrote, "I sometimes fear that people think that fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesques and monsters, as played out in endless reruns of the Nazis. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighbourhood, remind you of how great you once were, clear out the venal and the corrupt, remove anything you feel is unlike you. It doesn't walk in saying our programme means militias, mass imprisonments, transportations, war and persecution." And of course you could add to that list being told you can't speak whatever language you want when you're with your friends in a public place, being told that your desirability as a neighbour is determined by your nationality, or being told by an armed police officer what you can and can't wear on a beach. It's 10:44. Tim's in Scunthorpe. Tim, what would you like to say?
James, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm not very well, Tim, but hey, it's a living. What do you want to say?
Well, I'd like to just contribute to this conversation by just hoping to get a point across and give you an experience that I've got. I'll just seem very briefly. I'm married to my Romanian wife. We've been married together for 10 years. She's come from an academic background in Romania, although she started off in this country by contributing. She's been working every single day that she's been over here. Started off in a fish factory, has moved up to getting qualifications, and she's just finishing off a business degree, a management degree. But she worked for an organisation, James, that supports disadvantaged people in society from the office point, but she actually covered a duty over the weekend. And I just want to explain to the listeners and people, she covered a duty in the restaurant for a breakfast period. And it was during that session that she was verbally and racially abused, and one person was shouting because they didn't want to be served by her. Now, I want to explain the look in my...
Take your time, Tim.
The look in my wife's eyes and what that effect has had on an extremely academic, wonderful, contributing member of our society, because I include her in our society, she's contributed, has absolutely, to look in her eyes, the effect that's had in her this week. I am completely and utterly ashamed. I'm not a soft person, James. I've had a full career in the armed forces. I've contributed and spent many years during the Troubles in Northern Ireland in specialist roles. I know what danger is. I know the disadvantages we have in society and differences. But I would also say we look for excuses. We say poverty. My wife can't really ride a bike that well because she couldn't afford a bike when she was younger, James. They couldn't afford one. She's learning to ride now. She laughs about it. But I want to put across, this is the first time in 9 years that my wife has just been contributing, doing well. She's doing like I say, a business degree. She's in her final year there. She's full-time employed and full-time university.
What's changed then, do you think, in that 9 year period? I
honestly think that this is the Brexit scenario. I think the politicians have got a lot to answer for, but I'm not going to excuse members of society. I think it's just a simple case of these people, this poor man who's lost his life over, which is just bigoted. And I totally agree with you, mate. At the end of the day, this is about we just got to stop the PC on all this. It's down to bigoted ignorance.
I apologise for seeing a light side, but God knows we need one. I love the idea that it's political correctness that prevents people like you and me from saying what we see, which is just rancid racism, absolutely validated and richly rewarded. I normally balk at the employment of that phrase because it's so meaningless, but I know what you mean, the idea that people are biting their tongues, and of course they're going to have to stop biting their tongue soon. Tim, I'm late for the travel. Can we give our love to your wife, Tim? Tell her to
by all means,
make sure she listens to programs like this when she needs a little bit of antidote to the bile that she'll find elsewhere. All right. If you create an atmosphere of hatred, you cannot be surprised when hate crimes follow. Seems fairly inarguable, that position, but is it actually true? Do you think the architects of an atmosphere of hatred do know that hate crimes will inevitably follow, or do you think that they can actually kid themselves that it's confined to a television studio or a newspaper front page or social media? It doesn't actually seep into the consciousness of particularly young, impressionable, undereducated people and fester and grow into something a hell of a lot more worrying than an obnoxious comment on Facebook. I'm struggling, frankly, to retain my optimistic view of fellow humans. I find it almost impossible to believe that they don't know exactly what they're doing, especially when they stand up on a stage with Donald Trump. 0345 6060973 is the number you need to contribute. Sophia is in Crystal Palace. Sophia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Firstly, I agree with everything you've said, and I do think they know what they're doing. I think they know exactly what they're doing. And I actually spoke to, I don't know why I frequently engage with these people, but I do. I actually spoke to a UKIP member and questioned them about why they were using rhetoric which would appeal to fascists. And their answer was that they just wanted the votes. They didn't care where they were coming from. They just wanted the votes.
This is like Farage boasting about getting all the BNP voters over to his side, and somehow trying to cast it as evidence of not being a fascist, that lots of fascists vote for him.
I mean, I do think that these people are primarily to blame. And, you know, the person who covered you in your holiday, for example, people like that are primarily to blame.
This is my postcard from Devon. You're listening a little bit too closely to the programme. We can't presume that the other 750,000 people tuning in are as conscientious as you. I got back from holiday to find a postcard waiting for me saying, "We saw you in our white English town. Do not come back." I don't know that it's fair to presume that was off a UKIP supporter. It could have been a Britain First fan.
Yeah, but I'm trying to say something polite. They're two cheeks of the same face. You know, I think that it's very easy to point fingers, but I don't think that any of us can absolve ourselves. I think that we are all partially responsible for this because we allowed it to happen. We slept walk. We basically walked into this with our eyes shut. As soon as Nigel Farage's rhetoric was accepted as mainstream, this country changed. The level of political debate changed. It became nasty. It became adversarial. Even if we look at Ed Miliband before the 2015 election, when he said, and I quote, "It is not prejudice to talk about immigration." Well, it's not, but if you're talking about it within the current terms of reference, it absolutely is. The us and them, the deserving and undeserving, and that is not a long leap away from fully human and not.
No, you're right. And it's not. It's Uber. Well, it's to mention Ubermensch. The phrase that I think always resonates most with me is valid concerns, as if a concern is automatically valid if it's anti. It's not. I mean, this is the whole point. This is why it's so strange to see the constituencies where these sort of opinions are most virulent are the constituencies where immigration is routinely at its lowest, looking nationally. Harlow has quite a big Polish community, but it's had it for years. It's not had it recently. It's had it like Kidderminster, where I grew up, but we've got Polish councillors go back to the end of the Second World War, the Polish community in Kidderminster.
Yeah. You know, you're completely right when you say that, you know, it's going to be, you know, women next and then the elderly. And, you know, I was born in Belfast in 1976, and I know very well what the language of dehumanisation does. You know, you have to look at, I mean, you have to go back before I was born, but, you know, my mother's uncle, for example, was murdered by the Shankill Butchers. And that was a product of dehumanisation, you know?
That was Tommy Little's outfit, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there were several of them, and you know, but that, you know, when you dehumanise somebody, you could do all sorts of terrible things to them, and that's precisely what is happening here. We are dehumanising.
And when you talk about sleepwalking, I sit here now feeling sorry for. Well, regardless of what transpires, if teenage boys really have been put in a position where they feel it's acceptable to start abusing someone in the street for speaking a language they don't recognise, when you say that you feel sorry for them, is that part of the sleepwalking process? Because I worry sometimes that well, you sound almost as if you're saying you have to fight fire with fire, and that this attempt to be tolerant, this attempt to be understanding, in the same way that Islamophobes say, oh no, you've got to come down on everybody who's a Muslim, whether they're involved in terrorism or support terrorism or not. You can't start coming down on everybody who is...
No, and I think these boys are victims as well.
Yes.
You know,
but isn't that part of the sleepwalking process? I think you're right, but how do you distinguish between someone who's poured poison and someone who's swallowed poison, given that so many people who swallow poison soon start pouring it?
Well, in sleepwalking, I was referring to those of us who consider ourselves aware and tolerated this. And tolerated this because we are liberal and we do believe that, you know, people have a right to an opinion, a right to a voice, and you challenge that.
No, we believe that, but other people don't, you see.
Other people don't.
And they're the people that come across as, or the people who are consistently claiming that they're great believers in free speech and plain speaking, and anybody who says stuff that is true about them, i.e. you're a bunch of racist cretins, they need to be closed down and censored and shut up immediately. The Northern Irish parallel is a pertinent one, Sophia, but of course they're reminded of that old phrase about history, and those who don't learn from it are condemned forever to repeat it, and those who do learn from history are condemned forever to watch people who haven't learned from it repeating it. And there we are. It's just so boring to see the cycles come around again. The Oswald Mosley, the Enoch Powell, the Nigel Farage. It's just dull. But it's also deadly. Alan is in Harlow. Alan, what would you like to say? I had no idea we had so many listeners in Harlow. What can you tell us, mate?
Morning, James. I live in Harlow, obviously, and I went to school in Harlow. I only left year 11 last year, and some of my classmates there, they literally have the attitude of I'm racist, so what? And I think what that basically, my opinion is that the parents sow these seeds of hatred early on, and what causes this hatred to manifest in these children are groups such as Britain First, and how wide-reaching they are across social media. I mean, I've seen people in my old secondary school who visibly support Britain First. What they and also that they just have a general racist undertone in whatever they say.
Well, this is the inevitable next chapter in the dismantling of what cretins call political correctness. The next chapter is to say, yeah, all right, I am racist. You deal with it. And it would probably come from the bottom up rather than from the top down. The idea that it's going to come from younger people who are looking at their television screens and hearing completely racist things being said routinely on their radios, in their newspapers, and thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's what I say. I get called a racist when I say stuff like that. So I am. Why won't they admit that they're a racist? They will next. That'll be next. Yeah, so what if I'm a racist? So what if I'm a racist? And that was a lad who was at school in the town that we're discussing up until last June. Time is approaching 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know whether I'm in the mood to change the subject now. I have to gird my loins to pile into this. Let's judge it by the number of phone calls I get during the news. If you want to answer the question, who do you think the hate preachers are? Call me now. Hey man, yes, today is the day that the phrase attacked over foreign lingo appears on the front page of the nation's best-selling newspaper. Tragically, it appears under a headline that states killed by teen mob for being Polish. No charges brought yet, but 6 boys aged 15 and 16 have been questioned over the killing of a Polish man, allegedly beaten to death after a gang heard him speak a foreign language. It's pretty clear to me from my box of trolls as well as my calls so far today, it's pretty clear to me nobody disputes the fact that the rhetoric that we hear from politicians and some commentators has a direct causal link with the behaviour of people that swallow their poison. I'm just going to say that again. How could we ever have thought it didn't? This is what, I guess, in a sense, a mysterious phrase political correctness means. Pretending that it might not. Oh, no, maybe there is a reason why. Maybe they honestly don't realise when they complain about people speaking foreign that some people will think they're now allowed to complain to people speaking foreign. Like our Romanian lady told at the weekend in the canteen where she works by a customer that they don't want to be served by her because she's Romanian. And it's completely unfair to suggest, of course it is, that the referendum was binary and that everybody who voted, 52% of this country, God forbid, are certainly not racist. But if I had voted to leave, which I very nearly did at one point, if I had voted to leave, I wouldn't be so desperate to disprove what is now so obvious. I'd have a degree of guilt. But when I read the United Nations reporting that the referendum campaign has led to a spike in hate crime, that's the United Nations. When I read from the British police of the 3,000 incidents that were reported over the pertinent period, when I open up my own phone lines and hear stories like that chap in Scunthorpe talking about his wife, you just know. And maybe it's just guilt then. So, people that voted to leave, I've got friends and colleagues who voted to leave that don't have a racist bone in their body, but they've empowered and emboldened racists on a scale that they did not think would happen. I told them it would. I told them this would happen. I was checking a Facebook post I sent to a friend of mine a couple of days before the election. Say, look, I understand your autonomy and your sovereignty and your economy arguments, but you've got to understand I deal with these people on a daily basis. I'm like a sort of fetish figure for them. And if you vote to leave, they will think that you've empowered them to say things that they don't currently say. And these are the people who say the nastiest things already. Go back where you came from. Don't speak that language on my train. I don't want to live next door to you because you were born in X, Y, or Z. And I think now it's odd that we've normalised it. It's odd now that we've rolled out the red carpet for people who've created this atmosphere. You've got valid concerns about immigration. Okay, tell me what they are. Tell me what they are, and I will ask you 2 or 3 questions, usually involving how it directly affects you and how much effort you've put into looking for the positives. Nurse treats you. Immigration good. Never happens. Never happens. Don't want to be treated by her. It's turning our population of outward-looking, optimistic, decent people into inward-looking, nihilistic, violent people. And they must know. I'm being silly. I owe you an apology, don't I? Saying, do you think they really know? Oh, do you think they really know? It's hand-wringing liberal, even extending to racist rhetoric and inciters of violence. Do you think they really know? Maybe it's just a living. Hey, we've all got bills to pay. All our kids need shoes. I'm going to come on and slag off everybody who's brown today. It's just a bit of fun. It's just a pantomime. Oh, no, it isn't. Oh, yes, it is. I don't know how you get the genie back in the bottle. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And there are only two ways to break this down. There are only two responses to this question. Do they know what they're doing? Yeah, of course they do. Is there a link? Yeah, of course there is. Either you're honest or you're not. That's all. There's nothing else, is there? Either you're honest and you're seeing it, you know exactly what it is, you know exactly why it's happening, you know exactly who's responsible, or you put your fingers in your ears and, yeah, hands over your eyes. Hard to do both at the same time, I grant you. Unless you've got enormous hands, which leads us back to Donald Trump. He'd really struggle. You're either in denial, or you're dishonest, or you see what I see, which is a country rapidly rolling towards the normalisation of racism. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you want to join in. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Bart is in Barnet. Bart, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Just want to say, really talk about this from my perspective. I was 10 years old when I came over here to this country, back 14 years ago. I think I've settled in quite well. You know, my girlfriend's English. We've got a son together and another baby on the way. But I mean, at the moment, the way things are going now, we're really starting to think about our future and if we should really, plan our future here. We're actually thinking about going back to Poland and just starting a new life there.
Why, Bart? I mean, are you responding to the atmosphere in general or to specific changes in your own experience?
You know what? It's a combination of both. So increasing house prices, that's one thing. But ever since the Brexit vote, you know, all the stuff that you see on the news, all the hate crime, everything else, is just touching home a little bit in a way. I mean, look, I go to Harlow quite a lot. I've got a few friends over there.
Yeah.
It seems like a really nice town. We did actually think about even moving there at some point as well. But, you know, when I'm out in the shops and stuff, I speak Polish to my son quite a lot. And then thinking about it now, I think I'll be a little bit scared, a little bit wary of doing that now. And, you know, something like that scares me. I don't want to live in a country where, you know, something like that is okay and something like that happens on a daily basis, where I have to fear for what I say, how I say it. You know, it's not the country where I've been brought up in. It was completely different 5-10 years ago. I just don't know
10 months ago.
What's going wrong. Of course, yeah.
I kind of always want to come back at callers like you and offer you some sort of grounds for hope and optimism, and there are grounds for hope and optimism, which is the massive majority of people are as disgusted by what we're hearing today as you are. But it's the people who aren't disgusted by it that just seem to have the whip hand at the moment. They seem to have the what's the word? The baton seems to be with them.
You know, it's that kind of thing where I do understand it's not the majority. It's a very small minority because I've never really experienced anything firsthand. But for example, when I even talk about, you know, some family members of my girlfriends who are kind of Brexit, and they would kind of dismiss any news about hate crime, anything else, and said, oh, it's happened before, the English had it as well, it's nothing to do with Brexit. And it's just, you know, those kind of people make me think that, you know, we will just let these things...
I think they are in denial. They're not the dishonest ones. They're genuinely in denial because they don't want to feel that they bear any responsibility whatsoever for the actions of people who repel them. But they do bear a little bit of responsibility in the sense that there were plenty of people warning them that this would be one of the upshots of a vote in that direction. Plenty of people, hundreds of thousands of people. It was bloody obvious, wasn't it? You don't need to be a genius to see that if you do what racists are telling you to do, then other racists might feel a little bit empowered by the experience. I guess the liberal problem, liberal as, you know, someone who believes in freedoms. Oh, terrible word, liberals. Damn those liberals and their beliefs in freedoms. The liberal problem is perhaps trying too hard to see the good in people all the time. It's often levelled at them with regard to Islamist fundamentalism, often unfairly. I mean, the only thing that happens there is you condemn the terrorists. You don't condemn people who aren't terrorists in any way, shape or form. But this notion that, well, look, if he's on Question Time, he can't actually be a stone cold racist. If I was a 15-year-old kid and I thought, well, that's a bit disgusting. Oh, but hang on a minute, he's got a gig in a newspaper. It can't be as bad as it. Look, maybe I don't quite understand what racism is, because racism is supposed to be wrong. So why are they rolling out the red carpet for a racist? I think that might be part of the problem. That might be the sort of liberal contribution to the controversy, to the problem.
No, of course. I mean, it's just a little bit hard to kind of see a way out of this, or a way in which you can improve things, because the rhetoric, it doesn't appeal to the majority of the people who are smart enough to understand and to see through it. But those people.
Well, I think the next stage, it's going to be horrible. Yeah. It's going to be absolutely horrible. But the next stage has to be a sort of almost an increase in honesty on the part of the people who are lying, on the part of the people who know in their heart of hearts that they do judge you differently from how they judge me, Bart, because you were born in Poland. They know in their heart of hearts that they are, well, basically and purely racist. They do want to somehow be treated differently because they are of a different ethnicity or a different birth from you. You have to get them all out into the open before you can deal with the problem. Joey points out that you ask how to get the genie back in the bottle. Last time it took a world war, which is a pretty grim conclusion, but it would have been a world war in which our forebears fought alongside each other. 13 minutes after 11 is the time. Kieran is in Huxtable. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Hi, I don't know. I mean, you're talking about... sorry, good morning, by the way. Sorry. You're talking about all this sort of high-level abuse you're getting. Well, my mother's German. She came over from Germany in the late 50s. I was born in 62. She married my dad, who's English. I don't feel English at all. I'm actually going out to look into German nationality on this. I mean, I run a mobile crepe and galette van, and I would run another business to get kids active and adults active, that sort of thing. And it was just underlying stuff. So you would say, oh, I run a crepe. Have you fancied a crepe or some German sausages or something like that?
Yes.
And you'll get things like, I don't want this crap over here. Excuse the language, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. This rubbish over here. Go back, and it's not done in a vicious way. But, I mean, I'm shouting, or being loud. I hearing aid, so I have a hearing disability. And I would say that the problem I get with the hearing, I've had language thrown at me that you would not believe in the vernacular just because of my ears, because I think I'm not listening to them.
Oh, really? Yes.
To the extent that, I mean, if we're going back to the my German ethnicity, I don't feel English anymore. I don't feel part of this country. I don't feel that.
Since when, Kieran?
More or less since Brexit. A little bit before.
Really?
But because at the end of the day, I'm not. Let me put it this way: I've got. I left school with 1 O level because my hearing didn't get picked up till I was 27. I've now got a master's degree, a PhD. I'm doing a PhD in cognitive creativity. I've got a BSc in fitness science, and I've got a BA honours in visual communication and marketing. And yet, I don't see the point of trying. If I try anything, it's if you mention you're German, right? I'll go back to where you came from. I said, well, I am here where I came from. This is my country, right? I feel just as comfortable in Germany as I do in England, but I don't anymore in England, if you know what I mean.
I think I do. I kind of, again, as with the last fellow, I kind of want to offer you comfort and calm you down a bit, but you're describing your reality, aren't you? And I guess Huxtable is a long way from London.
I mean, somebody doesn't go out and say, right, can I get a dual nationality? Because of people wanting to leave Brexit. I mean, I have a big problem with Brexit because it just said Brexit. It didn't say immigration or the man.
No, but you know how they got over the wire. And I guess the decent people who hitched themselves to the rancid racist bandwagon of Mr. Farage and his friends, they now do have a deep sense of guilt, and it's a hell of a lot easier to pretend that the problems aren't there than it is to admit that you helped cause them. How do you stop the pretense that these people don't know exactly what they're doing? That's the big challenge now, facing a Britain awash with hate crimes and racism of a distinctly 1970s and earlier flavour. How do you actually stop it from happening? First thing you've got to do is deal with the people that preach it, isn't it? And yet, how do you do that? If they're box office, how do you do that if they put bums on seats? Everybody likes the ghost train, so how do you deal with fear? You can't shut the ghost train. That'd be a denial of freedoms, wouldn't it? That liberals despise. So you just have to start being more upfront and more honest, I think, calling out bigotry, prejudice and racism when you see it. And then also, of course, pointing out all the people who kind of know I'm right, but won't yet admit it. I wonder what it would take for you to actually come out and say it up front, instead of just sending your little anonymous tweets, to actually just come out and say, yeah, I want to be free to actually abuse people based on their birth. Because once you've admitted that, then a lot of other people will perhaps realise that they are potentially a victim rather than a bystander. Are you going to abuse people based on their birth? What are you going to do about, well, what else do we bring into it? Sexuality? Yeah. Gender? Disability? Yeah. All of that. History shows they're all on the list. Once you're allowed to abuse people based on their birth, based on circumstances of their birth, it never stops, that snowball. Which is why, of course, the validation and the emboldening that the racist element of the Brexit campaign, and I use that phrase very carefully because there was a hell of a lot of that campaign that was not racist, the racist element of the Brexit campaign has emboldened and validated these people on an epic scale. And the slightly naive question in the first hour about whether or not the preachers knew what they were doing has been rendered almost wholly redundant by contemplation. But I still sort of cling to this notion, and it's incredibly pathetic of me, actually. I still cling to this notion that people don't really feel that way. Even when you read the Donald Trump reports, people don't really think, even when you reflect upon slavery, people don't really think that because they were born a certain colour or born in a certain place, they're actually better than somebody else. Of course they do. It's just, I guess that's the problem. That's how the genie gets out of the bottle. People actually find it mind-boggling. But you can be on a train and object to what language the people next to you are speaking. Who the hell do you think you are? Mind-boggling. But, of course, while we're busy having our minds boggled, a lot of other people are busy having their minds poisoned. And that's where the hate crimes come from. You can't even deny it, can you? Ben's in Farnborough. Ben, what's going on?
Hi, James. Big fans. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
I was under the same opinion as you before voting in or out, and the thing that swayed me the most was the potential for the validation of people's ignorant tabloid racism, and that's what swayed me to vote the way I did. And now it's validated even more. People are saying things without any thought. My colleague who's Irish was on a train, and he was, just walking through the carriage, and he was told to go back from where he came from.
How did they know he was Irish?
Well, they had basically, they're going down the middle of the aisle. The woman who said it wanted to turn around and go the other way. And he said, "Oh, sorry, we're not going to get back past that way because it's really busy." And she said, "Oh, why don't you go back from where you came from?"
Now, how do you know she didn't mean Coach C?
Well, ironically, he was actually on the plane to Gatwick Airport to go back home for the weekend.
Oh, Lord.
But it still doesn't stop the fact that it's a very flippant and ignorant thing to say, and that is it. Like one of your earlier callers said, it's PC. Now, it's about the PC thing, about bringing people up on their ignorant point of view, and I think that it's frustrating.
I love this. This is a real turnaround. The idea that people aren't calling racists racist because of political correctness, when the racists have spent the last 10 years telling us that political correctness is the reason why they're not allowed to be racist. It's quite beautiful. There's a symmetry to it. It's almost unbelievable.
And I, just before the vote, I was down the pub with a couple of friends of mine who were definitely going to vote out, and the stuff that was coming out of their mouth, I love them dearly. I've known them for most of my life, and they were coming out with a lot of stuff that was just hate preached from, it was instilled in them from hate preaching, from political campaigns, from scaring people. I'm not saying there wasn't scaremongering on both sides, but they know what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They wanted the votes that they wanted, and they did it by this kind of instilling this hatred in people and making them think that foreign people and immigration is a massive problem, and they're actually bad people. And like your other caller said, they're dehumanising these people, and it's terrible. It's horrible.
Do you know? Can I ask you a question? And I think we're both grown up. Well, I know you are. Where's the line between banter? Between friends, because I don't know. I've been with Italian friends, one of whom has dual nationality and one of whom doesn't. And the one who doesn't have dual nationality kind of said, and it was a colleague of his, a mutual friend, said, "Oh, well, you'll be off soon. You'll have to go." And there's a chuckle, but I didn't have the chance to ask him afterwards whether or not that actually does reach his ears as pure banter, or whether or not, because there was no way it was meant. It was genuinely supposed to be funny, but it's a bit like telling a racist joke to your black mate, thinking, oh no, it doesn't mean you. I don't mean you, mate. I just don't know quite where that goes, that sense. If you bantered with your Irish friend about going back to Ireland, it wouldn't be racism. Do you see what I mean? That's where the confusion comes in for some people.
Yeah, and I think it's dependent on the friend group as well, because with that particular colleague, another one of our friends, the three of us who hang out quite a lot, you know, I'm British and part Canadian, and I've got my friend Barry, who's Irish, and another guy who is of Bengali sort of heritage. So, you know, between the three of us, we have pretty banterous kind of, you know, it's borderline stuff that we say to each other, but it never gets to that point where it's offensive. And of course there's going to be joking, but what we're talking about, and when we say it to each other, is it's hard to say banter backed up by educated opinion. But a lot of the time, the people who are saying, but you know, things that are very, very borderline is an uneducated opinion,
and that's where political correctness came from. There you go, isn't it? Because that was saying no, even when it isn't right, even when it is just banter, you're not allowed to say it, and that's where all of the confusion, perhaps, and all of the kind of roots of this can be traced back to is no, you're not allowed to say it because you actually are a racist. Well, no, I don't think I am a racist. So that's where the confusion and the frustration comes from, and why these old men keep banging on about political correctness without ever being able to tell you what they really mean by it. I love the idea that you don't call a racist because of political correctness. Are you going to start now?
What? Not calling a racist?
No, you're going to start calling it out more. Are you going to start? Because I did see.
I do all the time. I do all the time now. Like, you know, if someone's being racist, I'll tell them I think it's just wrong. As if, you know, if you thought someone littering on obviously it's not as bad as littering on the street or something, you should bring people up for this sort of stuff. Like, you can't just go around like being horrible and you know, breeding your hatred on other people because of your uneducated and ignorant point of view. If you're racist, it's wrong. Like, simple as that. Like,
lucrative, though. It's good business, good box office, nice little living to be made. If you wanted to get ahead in my game, a bit of racism goes a long way.
Maybe I need to be a politician.
There's more money in this. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. Ben, thank you. Couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060973. Of course, speaking to Bart earlier about returning to Poland, not a suggestion from me or indeed anybody that Eastern Europe has much bigger problems with these sort of issues than we do on one level. It's just a quality, if you like, of prejudice rather than a quantity. So the anti-Semitism that is now re-emerging in parts of Poland is truly terrifying. It's not confined to Britain, this, just look across the Atlantic at America. Financial crisis plus self-serving demagogue politicians equals fascism, always. Why? Because the less you've got, the easier you are to be persuaded that it's all the fault of someone else. Not the one with all the money, but the fella over there who just has the audacity to be washing cars for a living round the corner from your house. No, he's the reason I've not got what I deserve. He's the reason I've been denied my birthright. That bloke in the car wash round the corner. It's amazing, really, how history just carries on through the millennia, doing exactly the same thing again and again and again. And the tragedy here, as Joey suggested earlier, so when these things take root on the level they appear to be taking root at the moment, I still can't quite buy into the notion that we have got latter-day Mosleys and Enoch Powells among us on quite the scale that some people feel. It always ends horribly, and everybody suffers before things start getting better. It's 29 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The questions we're asking, if you've just tuned in, are quite strange ones, really, given the nature of this business. It's a question about whether or not the hate preachers realise. I'm not really talking about the Islamist hate preachers now, because I don't think anyone disputes that those scumbags know exactly what they're doing. Anjem Choudhury gets locked up for encouraging people to join Islamic State. There's no doubt whatsoever that he wants people to join Islamic State. But the middle class hate preachers in this country, the ones who pretend to be anti-establishment while begging daily to be let into it, the middle class hate preachers who are trying to turn you against Romanians or Poles or Muslims, in fact, do they know what they're doing? And Choudhury stands up and says, I support Islamic State and you should go and join it. You can't dispute what he stands for. When his middle class equivalents stand up and speak to a different audience about Romanian neighbours and people speaking foreign on trains? Do they know what they're sowing? Or are they so far up their own fundament that they just don't care? And it's going to be probably 10, 20, 30 years down the line, someone writes a book about how we allowed our country to be turned into such a crucible of hatred. But I tell you, some of the crucial points, some of the crucial milestones on that journey will involve political correctness being employed as a catch-all phrase to describe some sort of well-meaning movement designed to stop people being disgusting. There's another one as well. Oh, you can't say this without being called racist. It's almost as if you're not allowed to call people racist anymore. Some newspaper columnists even spell it differently. They put lots of A's in it or lots of Y's, so it's racist like that. And it's always puzzled me. I've featured in some of these articles, so I mean, it's puzzled me on two levels. But I get it now. You're just trying to toxify the word. Trying to say, you know, oh yeah, you call me a racist, it means you've lost the argument. It doesn't, does it? God, how could we all have been so stupid? You're actually a racist. You say you don't want to live next door to Romanians or you don't want people to speak foreign on trains. You're just a racist. And yet the media, the establishment, all the other kind of usual suspects have been counting the money, feeling enormous gratitude for the distraction, of course. If you were responsible for the financial crisis, the idea that it was somehow the fault of Polish plasterers and Romanian minicab drivers must have greeted you like manna from heaven. Oh, can we get this fella on TV more? He's going to blame it all on Muslims. He's going to blame all the poverty in this country on Poles and immigrants. Can we get him? Can we get her? Can we use these people a lot more? It's bloody great. I can't believe it. And the British people are swallowing it. The research shows, of course, that it is largely the less educated people who are swallowing it. But still, it's enough. It's enough to get us over the wire. It's enough to get me on the telly. It's enough to get me a newspaper column. It's enough to get. Oh yeah, look, can we find some more of these people who will just sort of help us preside over the biggest ever redistribution of wealth from poor to rich in British history and help us blame it all on the poor. It's great. It's bloody marvellous. And we've taken so long to wake up to it. And most people, of course, in a way, won't. Because if you feel that you may have actually contributed unwittingly and unwantingly to this process, Christ, that's a hangover that you've got to deal with on an epic scale. And if you've just sort of stood by the roadside, like us, going, no, please get off that bus. Please get off that bus. The bus is being driven by a bigot and it's heading towards a cliff, and there will be no control when it reaches the cliff over who dies and who doesn't. Just like the kind of Islamist terrorists who's quite happy to kill Muslims. These people who exist only to feather their own nests don't care who suffers in the process, as they sow their seeds of hatred and reflect the ugliest parts, make people feel better about the ugliest parts of themselves. And this, by the way, is me stirring up hatred, me sitting here in the minds of the followers, in the minds of the cultists, in the minds of the racists. This is me stirring up hatred, because what I'm doing is stirring up hatred against racists, and that makes things worse. You have to let the racists carry on being racist without being challenged. You have to let the people who think the country you were born in is more important than the 12 years you've spent in this country working and contributing. You have to shut up about them. You can't call them racist, because that's sowing hatred and division. The best way to reduce the amount of hatred on these islands is to let it go unchecked and unchallenged. Yes, because if you challenge it, check it, if you make the people who spout it feel ridiculous and ugly and small, then you're spreading hatred. It's quite brilliant. 11:37. Daniel's in Enfield. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I love the show.
It's all right.
I just wanted to pick up on something that you've said, I think it was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
About people...
I can't remember what I said a couple of minutes ago, Daniel, so you're going to have to bear with me.
I understand that, but it was a great point. People seem to create their own narrative in life because of the internet.
Yes.
And the information that's out there, a lot of it misinformation as well, of course. So I just wanted to say about the internet, I think plays a role in this, and also
what you're talking about
social media,
bias, confirmation bias, I think they call it. I first got this when a friend of mine fell under the spell of the EDL, and he was giving me lectures all the time on what Islam really means, and you've heard callers try to do it on this program, and what they do is they go online and they search for things that supports their position. Whereas I hesitate to say that this probably explains why degree level education breaks down on these issues so starkly. What degree level education teaches you to do is search out the opposing view. You go in search of things that challenge what you're being told instead of going out searching for the stuff that proves you should be frightened and angry all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to even go further on your point and say social media has a role, because we're in the sort of age of the trolls, and people troll people, and people seem to have... They can say the most hate-filled things, and they can hide behind a computer screen or a phone screen. And because it's the age of the sort of computer age, people can say these things, but I think then it sort of it then reflects in their
well, of course it does. And if they're seeing grown-ups do it on the telly, then they're going to think that they can do it in when they're sitting in their mum's back bedroom in their dressing gowns with their Tesco laptops.
I think then it then goes further than that. I think it then it creates how they think in the real world. I think it actually then they think, if I can say this on a computer screen, they start getting a bit brave saying these things, and then they don't realise where they are because we're so phone centric. They don't realise it, and then they start to think that when they're out in the real world. And I think that's where we're at, really. If one of the reasons.
If the situation in Harlow turns out to be as it's currently being reported, the brother of the victim saying they were attacked because they were speaking Polish, I don't think anyone can argue that the idea that this sort of behaviour is, just contemplatable, if that's even a word. You go online and you find people who are speaking in the most vile and insightful and obnoxious of terms. So and for younger people in particular, Daniel, you sound a lot younger than me, the line between real life, IRL, and the virtual world is a lot more perforated than it is for old fogies like me. I still see them as very different things. But for younger people, I've spoken to people who think they're having an actual relationship with someone they've never met. My girlfriend is online. She lives in America, and people my age find that incredible. But younger people find it a lot easier to just conflate the two worlds collide. The online world, where people used to say things they'd never have the guts to say in public, slowly becoming a place that just prepares them. It's like an apprenticeship for going out into the public and saying these things.
Yeah, and comments on like these. I might mention the company, but the video sharing sites and stuff like that. Comments on there, people, what they say, what they. Are you really thinking that? Are they really thinking this?
Well, I mean, if they're not today, they will be tomorrow when it goes unchecked and unchallenged. And I like the parallels with Islamism, with fundamentalism, because the notion of hate preachers in that faith being online, and we hear about the YouTube videos. If we went after people who are encouraging hatred of Poles, people who are encouraging hatred of Muslims, people who are encouraging hatred of Romanians, with the same alacrity that we go after the hate preachers who happen to be brown, it would be fascinating, because I see stuff on social media that must be borderline criminal, and yet routinely goes absolutely unchecked. And that maybe is a responsibility of the platforms. But I guess if major media companies are offering money to the hate preachers, you can't really have a pop at YouTube, Twitter and Facebook for not doing more to stop it. Daniel, thank you. Couple of phone lines for you. I'm taking this up to 12 o'clock, okay? So 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. We've touched on something here. It feels a little bit like we've gone down the rabbit hole, but I'm going to start bleating about political correctness. You're not allowed to call racists racist anymore. Actually, I've done that before, haven't I? I got a line about that in my book. About you can talk about immigration all you want without being called a racist, as long as you're not a racist. And now it's normal behaviour. Go back where you came from. Well, I come from Dudley. It's my favourite. First grown-up joke I got that. There were two from my childhood, I remember. One was Lenny Henry saying, I think it was the National Front at the time, or some sort of pre-Farage far-right movement, saying that we're going to give you money to go back where you came from. We give you 500 quid to go back where you came from. Lenny Henry, in his very, very early days, said, oh, that's great. I'm from Dudley. He's going to get 500 quid to go back to Dudley. And the other one was the one about the prince arriving at college. This was a lovely moment, actually, on LBC, when I sort of sometimes kid myself, it's only me and you, like literally two people talking to each other. And you remember there's a lot of other people listening as well. And I told a joke, I think it was on a Jasper Carrott show, where a prince, based probably on Prince Andrew, arrives at Cambridge University and he's standing on his balcony drinking a sherry with his bodyguard. And he turns to his bodyguard and says, why didn't you go to Cambridge, Perkins? And Perkins says, because I got the same A-level grades as you, sir. It's 11:43. Thomas is in the Aldwych. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hi, Thomas.
I'm a bit nervous, so bear with me, please.
Of course I will.
To share my experiences. I'm Polish, and my experiences being down there isn't that nice, really. First of all, I don't say I'm Polish anymore. If whoever is asking me where I'm from, and I'm hearing this question very often, and all I wanted to say that it started a long time before Brexit vote, so I don't think it has anything to do with that. My wife was assaulted by English women. We had witnesses. We had everything. Dropped the charges because there wasn't any witnesses. They said I had the dog's poo thrown at my door. I had bottles thrown at me because I dared to ask people to be quiet at night. And
that's not racist. That last one that would happen to me as well. From those sort of people.
No. But at that occasion, they be calling me the Polish sea. I don't have rights to come to their house. I should be quiet.
Of course.
That was a long time before Brexit. My daughter hasn't been invited to any birthday party since the parents find out that we are from Poland. That was 5 years, that's the story. Basically.
What's the silver lining?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's not about me. I can take it. But it's how do you explain to the 10 years old child that you're not being invited to the party?
Can I ask where you live? Or not? No, don't answer that if you don't want to. That's fine.
Medway in Kent.
Oh, okay. Kent.
Yeah.
How do you explain it? I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, Thomas. I don't know how I'd explain it.
But it's just because it all happened at the birthday party when my wife was attacked by these women, and since then it's all finished. That was her first birthday party, and since then she hasn't been invited to any more. And she
didn't eat all the sausages, did she, Thomas? Are we sure it's definitely based on being Polish? She didn't hog the parcel.
We just took that on ourselves. We just said it's because of us, because it's nothing to do with you. It's just us. Because we just have to handle that. She hasn't got any friends. She's just on her own. We're just trying to keep her busy. Trying to go with her to any after school clubs it's really hard for her, first of all.
Oh, mate.
But thinking about going back to Poland, there's no way. We're too long in this country. We have a mortgage, and she doesn't know Poland, and she doesn't know what's life there. How is it? She doesn't speak good Polish. It's really we kind of between the rock and hard place right now.
And do you think it will pass?
Hopefully, yeah, it will. It's just once. Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. At the moment, I'm thinking about if this Brexit really happens, and I'm expecting a little bit more of this stuff, happening. But another 5 years, I think, 5-6 years, maybe it will go past.
And then we'll, with a bit of luck, be back where we were a couple of years, maybe 5 years ago.
As I said before, it was all happening well before Brexit.
Hey, no one's suggesting racism was invented, but the figures show a massive upsurge. So the kind of experiences you had pre are now more likely to be occurring post, which is an important point to make. Thomas, I'd always remember, I want to keep in touch with you. I want your little girl to make some friends, mate. I'm sorry for sounding so pathetic, but you just broke my heart.
Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
10 minutes to 12. James, it's the 350th anniversary of the Great Fire of London. It's true, that, actually, from Thompson, who's in Carmarthen. Your Christian name, I've just noticed, has been removed by my obscenity filter, Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Thompson. I don't know what your Christian name is, but I really want to know now. For some reason, it's been rendered asterisks. But you're in Carmarthen, and I don't know that should be enough to narrow things down. 350th anniversary of the Great Fire of London. They built a massive model that they're going to set fire to later on the Thames. I wish I'll find out some more details for you. But this text goes on. That was widely blamed on Dutch and French and resulted in lynchings and violence against immigrants. And I also want to read you something that really sticks with me, actually, because I think it's quite critical of me, but I think it's probably... I can't find it now. It's off Mark. I'm going to find it. I think you're onto something there, mate. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to acknowledge what you describe. If I can find it. Chris is in Teesside. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on discussions you've been having. First of all, what you were saying about people like Nigel Farage and whether they know what they're doing.
Yes.
I think that if you look at Nigel Farage, you know, he wanted to leave the European Union. He didn't just start last year. He wanted to leave for decades. Interesting thing in one of the papers a couple of weeks ago about one of his friends that went to school with him.
Yes.
And what he was like at school. And I think that revealed a lot to a lot of people. But I think what it shows is that ultimately Farage was a man with a goal that he wanted to achieve. And he knew that he could resonate with people in particularly England in a way, around here as well, around Teesside, in a way that I don't think many other politicians really can. And I think in many ways that's almost, you could blame that's a failing of a lot of politicians in this country, in my opinion. The second thing I wanted to say was,
meaning that they should have offered an alternative narrative where people who are suffering from social exclusion and poverty were given either something else to blame rather than immigrants or some help.
Well, I mean, I suppose that, but I think it's just, that it was a culmination, not just of like a couple of years of frustration. I think it's years of neglect.
It is. I mean, there's research published today showing astonishing levels in terms of voting intention based upon education and earning less than £20,000, having a household income of less than £20,000. But I mean, what I struggle to, and this is because I live in a bubble myself. Everyone lives in a bubble, I guess. But I struggle to see how people. Because let's not forget that the same people who say immigrants have driven down wages will be the same people that will say in a month that we can't afford to have a national living wage, and no one will notice the hypocrisy or the dishonesty. So you talk about Farage having a particular gift, but it's a particular gift for conning people. There's no earthly way that people whose income is less than £20,000 are going to be suddenly better off when we leave the European Union.
Oh no, I completely agree. And that's what's so perverse about it in a way. I think he's a man. He's very clever. He knows how to achieve what he wants to achieve, and it's so tragic because
he knows that racism works. Racism works. Racism puts bums on seats. It gets you gigs in newspapers, television stations, and radio stations, and it allows you to be the nation's panto villain in chief. Although there's a little bit of competition on the way now.
Well, I think it manipulates people's frustration, but I think it's really interesting the parody you drew with Islamic State. Now, no way is he on the same level as that.
Well, for sure. But absolutely, categorically not.
No, completely, and I'm not ever going to suggest that. But fundamentally, they both have something they want to achieve, and they know how to appeal to people who generally have been neglected and haven't been reached by political powers or whatever, and I think that's really interesting. But what also really annoys me is that in the aftermath to Brexit, you had lots of discussion about the people that swung the vote. People, in the north of England, in other parts of England, I know Andrew Marr made a comment on it, but I think what's really depressing is that a lot of people just ridiculed these people. They didn't try there hasn't been an effort to understand why. Their vote was just as valid as someone who goes to university. It doesn't, just because they're less educated or anything like that doesn't devalue their vote. They have a reason for voting, and ultimately that's as legitimate as someone who goes to university, and you can't dismiss that and say that. No,
you can't. But how do you reason someone out of a position that they haven't been reasoned into? That's the challenge.
Yeah,
because this is why the phrase "valid concerns" is so relevant to what you're describing. The concerns aren't valid. You look at the actual factual reports, and people's lives are not being damaged or diluted on an epic scale by immigration. So if they are persuaded that they are, what do you do? People come on here and tell me immigration is ruining their life. I ask them for evidence. They haven't got any. They go away even angrier than they were when they arrived. So how do you reason people out of a position that they haven't been reasoned into? Because I agree with what you say. You have to find a way of almost respecting people who have been led to ill-informed, ignorant positions. But how do you do that? How do you reason people out of a position they haven't been reasoned into?
Well, I think the problem with a lot of times when you try to reason with these people is you tell them things rather than try and help them see the path as to why you believe something. You know, if you go and say your opinion is wrong, it's, you know, there's a graph here. Same with other issues, you know, there's a graph here that shows you are wrong. That's not going to change their mind, and that's not how their mind works. There has to be an outreach to be like, right, we hear that things for you are not great and you're annoyed, but this is not what you should be blaming, and it's not going to help your case. It's not going to make.
But that generally doesn't work. I think the avoidance of ridicule is a brilliant point, and it's a trap that many of us have fallen into. But you've just acknowledged facts don't work either. So what you're trying to do is distinguish between the people who like to be furious and frightened, the people who I will, for want of a better word, describe as your stone cold racists. They like it. They like the fact that they're now on the march. They like the fact that people are getting spat at in the street. They like the fact that people are being told to go home. And we can't touch them, you and I. But these people over here who've hitched themselves to the same wagon, and who, in the short term, Brexit has kind of conflated the two constituencies, their lives are not being ruined by immigration. In fact, if you're going to look at things like elderly care, the NHS provision, and even the staffing of nurseries, their lives are probably being improved by immigration. But
almost definitely. And it's really interesting because I go to uni in Glasgow, but I'm from Teesside, so you've got like chalk and cheese in terms of what happened with Brexit, with the EU referendum. And I think that's why it's so tragic that, say, a lot of people who are so anti-EU now, they don't understand that it would fundamentally benefit them in ways that they never even realise, which I think is the tragedy of the whole thing.
And when they do realise, they're not going to blame themselves.
There'll be another scapegoat. You know, after the financial crash, this came along. By the time it really starts to hit, I'm sure there'll be some other scapegoat, that there may be another Nigel Farage that can come along and appeal to people in ways that we have to get better at accepting that everyone works in the same way, you know. So
I can't remember a call that has resonated just in terms of theory and discussing things rather than telling me a story. You've hit a lot of nails on heads, and a lot of people, I guess, in my profession have to take a little bit of responsibility for this. It's great ratings to ridicule and laugh at these people. We used to have great sport with UKIP supporters, but it's not them, is it, that we need to be talking about? It's not the ones who ring up a radio station to say stupid things. It's the ones at home who would never ring a radio station in their lives, but who believe what they read in their newspapers or what they see on their television. Because why wouldn't they? They're decent, open-minded people, and the information they are getting is poisonous. I don't know what the antidote is, Chris, but I'm really grateful to you for taking the time to put the call in, and those twin perspectives as well of Glasgow and Teesside being particularly interesting. A lot of love coming in for Thomas and his little girl. That phrase now is probably going to become part of the national vocabulary. It's nothing personal, darling. It's just racism. They're not being horrible to you personally. They'd be horrible to all 10-year-olds with a Polish parent, and eventually a German one too.